The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Welcome to Squawk Box, and here are your headlines. Guilty. Donald Trump becomes the first U.S. president to be convicted of a crime, found guilty on all 34 counts in his hush money trial. The Dow dropping more than 300 points, pulled down by Salesforce and on track for its worst week in over a year, while the Nasdaq looks set for its best month since November.
A surprise contraction in China's factory activity heaps further pressure on policymakers. That comes as Beijing looks to reignite the world's second largest economy. And fortifying the far right, Hungary's Viktor Orban backs Marine Le Pen as she extends an olive branch to Giorgia Meloni. It's all ahead of European elections. Saxony Minister President Michael Kretschmer says leaders need to tackle the issues to win the argument.
The dominant topics are migration, energy policy, state overreach, as seen with the recent farmer protests. If we don't fill the vacuum in which populists operate, we will never be successful.
Good morning, everyone. Let's get back to our top story. Donald Trump has been found guilty on all 34 counts in his hush money trial, making him the first U.S. president in history to be handed a criminal conviction. He is due to be sentenced on July the 11th, just days before the Republican Party is expected to formally announce him as its candidate for the presidential election. NBC's Laura Jarrett filed this report.
Tonight, former President Donald Trump found guilty, convicted by a Manhattan jury of all charges. Now the first American president ever convicted of a crime. Jurors finding Mr. Trump guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying his business records to cover up a conspiracy to influence the 2016 election by hiding how he reimbursed his former fixer for paying off a porn star before the election. The Manhattan jury of 7 men and 5 women included 2 lawyers, 2 in finance, and the foreman in sales, and reached their decision after 2 days of deliberations, after hearing from more than 20 witnesses over 6 weeks. The prosecution's case largely came down to whether jurors would believe the word of Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's former attorney and self-described fixer. Cohen was the only witness who directly tied Mr. Trump to the alleged crime of falsifying business records. He testified Mr. Trump directed him to pay off Stormy Daniels so she couldn't derail his campaign. She'd alleged a sexual encounter years before, but Mr. Trump vehemently denied it. Prosecutors argued at trial the former president was desperate to keep her silent, panicked after the release of the Access Hollywood tape, and then covered it all up, approving a scheme to disguise the $130,000 payoff with a phony paper trail through invoices, vouchers, and checks. Cohen's credibility in this case was key, the defense team branding the now disbarred lawyer who'd been convicted of lying under oath as the MVP of liars with an axe to grind against Mr. Trump, while prosecutors argued Mr. Trump chose Mr. Cohen for the same qualities that his attorneys now urge you to reject his testimony. Mr. Trump, who did not testify, reacting to the verdict tonight, attacking the case as politically motivated by a Democratic DA in deep blue Manhattan.
It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened.
Outside of court, boos and cheers. Late today, District Attorney Alvin Bragg reacting to the verdict.
We arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law.
All right, a lot of ramifications and implications to get through. Let's discuss this and unpack this with Stephen Mavilio, principal at Forza Communications and Democratic strategist. Stephen, thank you so much for staying up late for us out there in California. Look, this was a massive media circus, and I'm wondering, what are the implications here for the Trump campaign down the track? Will it help him or will it hurt him?
Well, so far he's been pretty Teflon when it comes to this issue. His numbers haven't moved in either direction much during this entire trial. And he's right. I think ultimately November 5th will be the deciding point, and the Biden campaign said the same thing today. We'll have to see if the American people are comfortable with putting a felon in the highest office in the land.
Once again, you argued that it was Teflon Trump all over again. So in a sense, does it mobilize, galvanize his voters to come out and vote for him? Because as he said there in the package that we just watched together, it was a disgrace. Do the viewers view it the same way? Do they even care about it? Do they just care about what Trump means for the economy?
Well, I think the people that support Trump are emboldened to be fired up about this decision in their own way, as are the people on the left who are cheering it. But this election is going to be about 3 or 4 to 5% of the people in the middle who haven't made up their mind, who are weighing issues like the economy, abortion, and inflation, and many other things. And this is just one more piece of that pie.
Stephen, good morning to you. I mean, good evening to you as well from your side, actually. But if we look at this and just realize that Trump now ultimately doesn't have to no longer keep up with the gag order that was then placed on him before this trial or the conviction then was put forward, does that mean then that he could ultimately use the platform a whole lot more to sort of ramp up his election campaigning?
Yeah, and I'm sure he will. This is not over. He's going to appeal it. There are several other trials underway that will happen in some form or another before Election Day. The sentencing is going to be days before the Republican convention. He's going to play his violin about this as much as he can and call it political. And, but I don't think it really moves the people in the middle. The people in these 5 states that are going to make the difference in the election really don't care about this too much. They care about issues that are important to them. They're not people that pay attention to this election every day like we do. And so, this is one more thing. Americans are very character focused when it comes to their president. And I think, at the end of the day, somebody who's been impeached twice and is under investigation and has been found as a convicted felon today, I think that all is going to matter at the end of the day.
Yeah, and what about the Biden side of all of this conversation? I mean, does President Joe Biden then look at this and think, well, now there's another form of or way to kind of attack Donald Trump, or does this not sort of factor into their campaign, you think?
Well, there's a lot of people that think he should be more of an attack dog on this. He's acting very, what they call presidential right now, about it staying above the fray and let other people do the dirty work. But, he's going to have to be more hard hitting. I mean, the polls show him behind. They're going to have to do something to really make Trump's character one of the deciding factors in this election. And it already is. And every day that goes on, Trump seems to do something that feeds into that frenzy.
Stephen, a final point here from me, because I'm sure you saw the most recent NPR PBS poll, which tells us that Biden would actually beat Trump by 50% to 48%. That said, big worries when it comes to some of the key demographics, young people and Hispanics. This is where Biden has lost so much ground. Can he turn this around?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you have to look at those numbers with a grain of salt. That's a national poll. Biden actually, and Hillary actually won more popular votes than Trump did. But it's those 5 or 6 states that are really going to matter. And that's where this 2, 3, 4, 5% swing of votes in either direction will make all the difference. And why this factor, along with continuing factors about Trump's character and personality, might spell a difference and give Biden what he needs. It's not much that he needs to make up in those states, but this only helps him. I don't see how it hurts.
Stephen, thank you so much for your perspective. Thank you so much for staying up late as well. Stephen Mavilio, Principal Forza Communications and Democratic Strategist. And for more on the verdict and what it could mean ahead of the upcoming election, head online to CNBC.com. It is the final day of May. What does it mean for the U.S. markets?
Yeah, well, Carolyn, a lot of movement has certainly been seen in this market picture across this month, right? And we've actually been looking at it and thinking, well, is there a little bit more to go? Are there enough legs in this rally to actually continue it on? Let's just take a step back and remember that in October last year, we saw sort of that pivot then from the Fed saying ultimately they'd done enough and they believe that the rates were at restrictive territory and that the next move is probably going to be where they look for a cut. The market then priced in at least 6 or 7 rate cuts then for this year. That's been tempered all the way down to 1 or even 2 rate cuts then for the most part of this year. So that rally that we saw also moved on to the first quarter of this year. It did, however, ease just slightly in the month of April, but it seemed to come back a little bit in the month of May. There wasn't that sell in May and go away sense that we got then for the most part of this month. But that has creeped in over the last few days. So is it again an AI play or an AI question mark that the markets are pretty much asking? And is the earnings momentum beginning to fade, or is it just the question marks around that Fed rate outlook that the market is actually looking towards? So big questions still at play. The Dow Jones Industrial was initially on course to have its best month of the year. That was just on Wednesday. But over the last 2 days, because of Salesforce, things have actually gone down quite dramatically. And we'll actually unpack that Salesforce story a little bit more a little bit later on. But it is still on track to move higher for the month. In fact, this could be the 6th out of 7 months then that the index has actually managed to move higher then as well across the board for all of these majors then on Wall Street. 4% higher than for the S&P 500 again. That was more than 5% on Wednesday. That's now trickled down as well, as you see a few significant losses with the Nasdaq composite still anticipated to move higher. Of course, Nvidia being the main story on that front. In fact, Nvidia is very, very interesting. We'll also get into that one. But here's your tech counters as well for this month and how these have moved higher then as well. So big gains across here, right? Apple, 12.3%. We had been asking ourselves the question on whether the tech spend then coming out of Apple will continue. Of course, recently they've just launched their new iPad as well. A little bit of an AI spend on that one. But is it going to be enough? Will they still find a more momentum trade across this board? In fact, we could have even added Netflix to this board as well. That went up 18% in this month too. It was very interesting to look at. 6.5% higher for the biggest market cap stock, Microsoft as well on this month. There's Nvidia, 28% higher. And let's talk about this story then just a little bit, if you will, at this stage. The question marks around that AI trend, as it were. Not a hype cycle, as many people are saying then, and saying that actually there's significant upward movement that is possible for this company. So much so that at present, Nvidia's market cap is actually the same, if not higher than Amazon and Tesla combined. Now, if you thought that was a lot, well, it's higher than the FTSE 100, the entire index. That's the market cap then. $2.72 trillion then for Nvidia. Significant upward shift there. But as you can tell, also over the last few days then of this month has begun to ease a little bit. So what happens with this entire AI trade then? But still, the biggest gainer across this month, or one of the biggest gainers as well, then 2.8% to the good. Let's unpack this month then and how things have fared. Roelof Jan van den Akker is the senior technical analyst at ING and joins us now as well. Roelof Jan, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. That Nvidia surge then for this month just looks like it's going to continue to have legs. Are you a little bit worried though that it's just these mega cap stocks that the market is heavily reliant on? You're seeing the S&P equal weighted average index actually, that's only up 3%, while the S&P overall this year up 10%.
Yes, good morning. Yes, I believe that the bet for higher prices towards the end of this year is still favorable. And also on a short-term basis, we are seeing a kind of a consolidation. Prices are staying around the March top, around 52.60, with the rising 50-day moving average around 5,280. And as long as prices are staying above this support area, we should expect the next move up in continuing the trend above the latest peak at 5,343. So bullish undertone still for me.
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of that uptick then is still those mega caps, right? I mean, we had been speaking about the supposed broadening out of the market this year. Why is that not happening?
Yeah, I think, and that was the same as we saw in the past few years, the magnificent seven. It's more the same picture. Investors are focusing on a small a group of companies who is leading the pack, and that's more or less the same we are seeing now. Just a small group of stocks are leading the way up in the Nasdaq, and that's of course something to worry about. But as long as the trend is up, we should follow the trend and not trying to jump in front of a train to expect the next decline, just purely based on just that the group of leaders is very small. So yes, you have to look out for this, but I believe as long as it's an uptrend. And with the same situation as the Magnificent Seven in the past few years, we could go higher.
Olof Jan, let's move on and talk about the bond markets, because we saw such a big move when it came to the bond space this year, in particular in the U.S., where we saw a spike in yields between 10 and 15 basis points. What do the charts tell you about the 10-year note in the U.S.?
Yes, I think in general, it's the price movement in a 2-note on the upside is somewhat disappointing. If you look at the daily chart during the past few years, since the end of 2022, you see a kind of a downward sloping channel. But this is more consolidation than a downtrend, as we see an overlap in tops and bottoms. So as long as we are consolidating above the April low at around 107, we could see some more upside, but we need to break above the 50-day moving average line at 109 and the 200-day exponential moving average line at 110. Then we could see a move towards the upper end of the channel around 113. But I believe that this channel could continue for a long while, possibly years from here. And the most scary part for me is that if this is the price reaction to the large decline we saw from its high around 140 in 2020, then it should be, the overall picture should be very bearish for the T-note.
Finally, a quick view from you on the DAX. It's obviously off the recent record highs. Can it reclaim that level?
Yes, I think this is the weekly chart, and it shows a steep rising trend from the COVID lows in 2020. It shows an uptrend. There's upside potential left towards the upper end of the channel around 20,370 at the moment. That doesn't mean that we will move to this line immediately or in one straight line. No, not at all. But as long as the structure of higher lows and peaks remains intact, and that is in the weekly chart, as long as prices are staying above the horizontal support at 70,370, we shouldn't be too bearish, and a rise above the recent peak at around 18,900 would be bullish and would continue the uptrend. So also here, the outlook is bullish, but we have to wait for confirmation that the uptrend will be continued on a short-term basis. And there's a lot of work to do on the downside before we'll see a break below the 40-week exponential moving average line around 70,200. That would suggest a somewhat larger pullback in the uptrend, but the overall picture remains bullish, and I would say continuation of the uptrend around 18,900 should be more expected than a downside move.
All right, appreciate your time and your technical insights. Olof Jan van den Akker, Senior Technical Strategist at ING. And of course, we're counting down to April's all-important PCE inflation data. That's due today. Economists polled by Reuters expect the core and headline readings to both remain unchanged from their March levels, with expectations of sticky inflation fueling bets the Fed could hold rates higher for longer. And traders are currently pricing in just under 35 basis points of rate cuts from the U.S. Central Bank this year, and they're split close to even on the chances of a first cut in September. That's according to LSEG data. Now, China's official manufacturing PMI unexpectedly dropped into contractionary territory for the month of May as property woes continue to weigh across the economy. The official figure fell to 49.5, missing analyst forecasts of 50.4, refreshing calls for further government stimulus. So in this case, Arbila, it was very much like bad news for the economy is actually good news for the markets.
Yeah, looks that way at present, right? And that PMI figure, I think, some surprise to have dipped just below that 50 mark as well. They're hoping the expansionary territory move, considering that just this week we had already seen expansions on hopes, or the IMF saying that they think growth for China is actually going to surpass or hit 5% at the very least. One would think that manufacturing would be one of the sectors to actually move higher. Maybe there is still some room to do that, but whether that comes about, we'll certainly see. Let's move on then. Coming up on the show, well, Estonia's defense minister telling CNBC the US is not escalating things by partially lifting a ban on Ukraine using its weapons to strike Russian targets. We'll bring you that exclusive interview. It comes up after the break. And also on the show, OPEC Plus is reportedly working on a deal to extend some of its oil production cuts into 2025. More on that story later this hour. And don't miss our exclusive interview with the Saxony Minister President Michael Kretschmer ahead of the European elections next month.
Ambition to me is about doing better.
I think ambition creates a pathway.
The best advice I can give someone starting off a career is don't have a career, have lots of careers, try loads of different things.
Talk to people and put your ambition out there.
I don't feel that I've hit peak ambition because it's a learning journey.
CNBC is where ambition meets opportunity. What does living ambitiously mean to you? Hear it from our CNBC anchors, reporters and global business leaders on CNBC.com.
Welcome back to the show. Estonia's defense minister has told CNBC that America has done the right thing in lifting a ban on Ukraine using its weapons to strike Russian targets. He was speaking on the sidelines of the Shangri-La Dialogue Defense Summit in Singapore, and Lin Lin joins us with all the latest and a summary of all her conversations. Lin Lin.
Good morning to you, Carolyn. And as you just said, we got that confirmation. It started off with a report and then the official confirmation from Washington that it has now authorized Ukraine to conduct limited strikes on Russian territory. Really significant because really the US was the biggest major holdout here on this policy, and this marks a pretty significant pivot for Washington. This is coming, of course, as Washington has been receiving quite a lot of pressure on this front. Certainly, President Volodymyr Zelensky has been pleading for it, and that pressure increasing as, of course, Russia launched that offensive into Kharkiv. It will be very interesting to see the response coming through from Moscow, because we know that earlier in the week, Vladimir Putin did say that there would be serious consequences if these weapons would be used in that way. As I said, I spoke with the Defense Minister of Estonia earlier, and I asked him about this. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The only thing we can help or we can do at the moment is to allow Ukrainians to defend as they need to defend its country and its people. And this is why, of course, every asset we have given them, it has to be used also for them as they need. Because when you take, I've been hearing many times that, it's an escalatory move that we send tanks or we send F-16s. The only one who has been escalating the war since 2014 has been Vladimir Putin, and this is why this is the only right thing also to do from American side, to allow Ukrainians to use the weapons as they need to.
And do you think we're going to see other Kyiv allies do the same?
The key allies have done that already, so I've said that, especially when you talk about France. Of course, now we need to see also what Germany will do, but UK has provided already Storm Shadows to Ukraine. So this is obvious that when we are giving something to Ukraine, then they can also use that as they need.
And what about this other discussion in terms of allowing troops in Ukraine for training purposes. Is this something that Estonia would potentially be considering?
Well, of course, we have to understand that the most acute need still is for ammunition and for air defense. So this has to be in the main focus, that we cannot tear the focus to somewhere else. But when we talk about training, our position has always been that we need to train Ukrainians as much as they need, because at the moment the European Union is doing around 60,000 by the end of the year. My message has been that we have to be ready to increase that to 100,000. And let's see, when there will be an European mission and we go all together in Ukraine to make the trainings, then we cannot exclude that. But first and foremost, as I said, we have to focus on ammunition and air defense.
Now, away from Ukraine, we've actually just had confirmation from Chinese state media that the defense chiefs of US and China, that's Lloyd Austin and Dong Jing, have now met on the sidelines of the Shangri-La dialogue. This was something that was anticipated and watched very closely, because this is actually the first face-to-face talks between the two defense chiefs since 2022. And it was actually at this very event last year when, if you remember, the defense chief of China at that time, Li Shangfu, snubbed Lloyd Austin. It was something that certainly made global headlines. So certainly looking for more lines to come out of that discussion was, for example, some of those thorny issues in relation to the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea discussed as a part of that. Certainly in terms of the analyst view here, many say that given the rift between US and China is quite structural and fundamental, that they're not expecting anything kind of substantive to come out of this meeting, but still important in terms of setting those guardrails and preventing any kind of miscalculation or misunderstanding veering into conflict. Now, we're also watching the keynote speech, which will happen this evening. This year it will be given by the Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And of course, on that front, we have seen escalating tensions between Manila and Beijing in terms of the South China Sea, and also a special address by the President-elect of Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto. And I mention that because last year he did present a pretty controversial plan when it comes to the war in Ukraine and Russia. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say about that. Back to you guys for now.
Thank you for listening to Squawk Box Europe Express.
For more market-moving news, you can head to CNBC.com.
Or join us again on the show with Steve Sedgwick, Karen Cho, and myself, Arabi Lekumete, weekdays on CNBC.